Good afternoon. My name is Tom Beaker, and I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag Lecture Series, held here at the Museum of Nebraska History on the third Thursday of each month. A detailed schedule of this series, as well as information about all of the Historical Society activities, it can be found at our website, www.nebraskahistory.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the funding for the filming of these lectures. Their financial support allows us to tape and broadcast these programs on public access television. One of the enduring legacies of the New Deal was government patronage of the arts, part of which were the murals that were commissioned for post offices across the country. Bob Puschendorf, the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, has 30 years service with the state of Nebraska and the Nebraska State Historical Society. His new book discusses Nebraska's artistic legacy of New Deal era post office murals. Bob?
Thank you, Tom, for that warm welcome. I'm really pleased to see so many friends and colleagues here today. I think all of you have provided some level of moral support in this work, and I'm really pleased to see you here. My first technical glitch. Believe it or not. Today's program is based on the new book, published with the assistance of Jim and Rhonda Seacrest, who are in the audience today. Thank you very much. As respected patrons of Nebraska art, and it's indeed gratifying that you found necessary or willing to fund the publication of this book. In 1933, a presidential commission appointed by Herbert Hoover issued a report that said, for the overwhelming majority of American people, the fine arts of painting and sculpture do not exist. And perhaps this report set the stage for federal art projects that would follow. The grim days of the Great Depression affected many lives, and the new president, Franklin Roosevelt, promised a new deal for the American people. The New Deal programs left many enduring legacies among these massive public works such as roads, bridges, dams, and public buildings. But several projects for the fine arts would be established during the New Deal. Perhaps the most significant project for public art found its home in the Treasury's section of painting and sculpture, later the section of fine arts, which had been authorized by the Secretary of the Treasury. It was commonly called the section. It would be dedicated to murals and sculpture in newly constructed federal buildings, including post offices. The section was centralized in Washington under the watchful eyes of its administrators to ensure control over the production of artwork. And you'll see today some of the comments and some of the criticism that the bureaucrats in Washington gave to the production of these murals. Post offices were the logical choice for presenting art to the common folk. And what better place? The post office was the center of the local citizenry for the conduct of business and the daily delivery of mail. It was a place where people congregated socially. By placing murals in post offices, especially those in smaller towns, original art could be taken to local audiences where art was seldom seen. They would bring art to the people, promote American values, and provide an outlet for the creative spirit of artists. And under the New Deal, the most ambitious campaign of construction of federal buildings and post offices was initiated. The building program, housed in the Department of the Treasury, included the construction of hundreds of new post offices. In fact, it's estimated that more than 3 times the number of post offices were built in the decade of the New Deal as during the previous 50 years. Murals would present subjects familiar to the people in simple and direct manner. The stylistic manner was referred to as the American scene, espoused as a truly new American art form, turning its back to European influences and taking its cues from American subjects in a realistic manner. Examples of mural art included depictions of the Postal Service, contemporary scenes related to the community, such as small-town life, people at work on farms and industries, and local history and folklore. One of the most popular of mural subjects was local history, often drawing from sometimes questionable fact and local lore. It was seen that murals should exude optimism to the public, far from their plight of the Depression. After all, the Depression was seen as temporary and the murals would be lasting. Post office murals are often confused with programs such as the WPA. But unlike work relief projects, which focused on make work projects for the unemployed, artists were selected on the basis of their merit. For the largest of federal buildings and postal facilities, a competition system was established. And for the smaller post offices, the section selected artists who showed talents, often based on works submitted for the larger competitions. This created opportunities for women artists and minorities, many of whom had never had the opportunity of gaining attention in the art world. When entering into a contract for a mural, the subsequent process has been described as a correspondence course in painting for the public and how to paint. The section scrutinized the subject matter, and sometimes the minutest details. In satisfying the public, Leonard Thiessen, Nebraska artist and art critic for the Omaha World Herald, commented on the section's oversight, quote, "Treasury Division murals, like all official art, have definite limitations and must be as squawk-proof as possible. Too uncompromising reality is apt to bring instructions from Washington to fatten up the farmers and give them a pleasant smile," unquote. The artist usually conceded to the comments and complied with the recommendations. Some valued the comments, others were more resistant. But since payment was based on satisfactory completion of the mural, most complied dutifully. However, despite the scrutiny of the section, the murals were sometimes the subject of unfavorable comment by local citizens. 15 new post offices would eventually be authorized for Nebraska. 12 would receive murals commissioned between 1937 and 1941. The Nebraska post office murals represent an excellent cross-section of the artistic talent, subject matter, and standards set by the section. All are still in their original settings in post offices, except in Valentine, where ownership of the building was transferred from the Postal Service and now serves as an educational service unit for the county. They're all accessible to the public and those who wish to admire them. All have also been listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Because only smaller classifications of post offices were destined for Nebraska, no competitions were held for their commissions. The artists were selected instead on the basis of works submitted to the larger competitions or the competency they displayed in painting murals. Most subjects took their cues from the locality in which they were intended. Artists were encouraged to visit the locale, talk to local historians, postmasters, etc., to get ideas for subject matter. The most popular subjects, however, were those recalling local history. 6 of the Nebraska murals depict historical themes, but historians today may critique the accuracy of the events represented in those featuring historical content. As a product of their time, these historical subjects show how artists of the period interpreted history in sometimes stereotypical manners. The murals also show that relative newcomers to the art scene, women artists and minorities, had a chance to be recognized by the section. Ethel Magaffin, for example, was only 21 years old when she was commissioned for the mural in Auburn, Nebraska. 4 of the 12 murals in Nebraska are represented by women artists, those in Hebron, Valentine, Auburn, and Albion. Edward Chavez, a Mexican-American artist born in New Mexico, received a commission for the Geneva post office. Many of the Nebraska muralists had little public exposure to their works. Now for the murals themselves. Albion, Jenny Magaffin entitled Winter in Nebraska. It's oil on canvas, done in 1939. Jenny Magaffin was selected her subject matter for the Albion Post Office as an agricultural theme, an excellent example of the American scene. It's dominated by hues of gray, and the mural evokes a cold winter evening with a farmer taking his milk cows to a large barn. The work reads from left to right, with the farmer placed in the immediate foreground and herds his cattle toward the barn in the immediate background. In the distance is a snow-covered landscape with contours of corn rows. Blustery clouds fill the sky, and the image is framed on both sides with barren trees. In Auburn, we have an example of the work of Ethel Magaffin. It's entitled Threshing, 1938, Egg Tempera and Oil on Canvas. The influence of the American scene is evident in Ethel Magaffin's mural for the Auburn Post Office. The subject had familiarity to the community, since threshing was a time when farm families came together to work in the harvesting of wheat with their neighbors. Magaffin approached her subject by placing the threshing scene in the foreground and creating a shallow visual field with only a hint of the wheat field in the distance. Moving from left to right, the eye follows the progression of the threshing process in one sweeping glance. From the groups of figures pitching bundles from the hay rack, another feeding the wheat into the machine, and figures filling bulky sacks of threshed wheat. The golden plume of chaff gives the sense of motion as it billows from the thresher. Magaffin used a palette of warm yellows evoking the golden wheat and the bright summer sunshine. Unlike so many others, Ethel received no critiques from the section. It highly approved of her use of colors and the subject matter. Ethel and Jenny were twin sisters who attended the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. And Jenny's future husband is Edward Chavez, who also did a mural in Hebron. Crawford, Nebraska, The Crossing by G. Glenn Newell, oil on canvas, 1940. G. Glenn Newell, commissioned for the Crawford Post Office, selected a subject of a wagon train of pioneers, depicting what he described as sunshine, youth, action. The stream shimmers with light, shadows and reflections as wagons prepare to cross. Silhouettes of wagons curve in the distance along a ridge line. Storm clouds rise in the distance. At age 70, Newell was the oldest artist to paint a Nebraska mural, and his work reflects an older, more traditional style in which he practiced. Geneva, here's the work by Edward Chavez, Building a Sod House, Oil and Tempera on Canvas, 1941. For the Geneva Post Office, Edward Chavez selected a historical subject of the building of a sod house, the typical abode of many early Nebraska pioneers. Chavez effectively uses the spaces above the postmaster's door by balancing the figures and bridging the entrance to the postmaster's office. The front figures are firmly grounded in the predella, hoisting a ridgepole which spans the postmaster's door. And predella is the little sections of the mural that hang below the main body of the mural. Giving movement to the mural is a man who strongly holds the reins of workhorses that strain to pull a sled of sod blocks. A woman and child observe the building of their future home. The prairie background of rolling hills in muted colors is framed by the doorway. Hebron, Eldora Lorenzini, oil on canvas, 1939. Lorenzini painted in hues of brown and gold, and the mural portrays a great herd of buffalo stopping a train. A group of men in front of the train take sport in shooting into the herd. In the background, Eldora Lorenzini depicts the treeless plains under a blue-gray sky. The herd recedes far into the background, providing a sense of depth, while the large figures of buffalo in the foreground almost stop the herd from running off the edge of the mural. Lorenzini had perhaps the most difficult time satisfying the section in Washington. It took over a year of correspondence to have her studies approved, but 3 weeks to paint the actual mural. In the meantime, she was forced to live in the Colorado Springs YWCA. Minden, entitled Military Post on the Overland Trail by William E. L. Bun, 1938, oil on canvas. The most meticulous and arguably historically accurate is William E. L. Bun's depiction of Fort Kearney for the Minden Post Office. Presented as a bird's eye view in blue greens, the subject represents itself under a broad horizon. A procession of conveyances lines the bottom of the mural, which can be likened to beads on an abacus. A bold inscription is placed at the bottom of the mural. Fort Kearney, Protectorate on the Overland Trail. Bunn created a composition of buildings and structures variously constructed during the active service of the fort. His details were accomplished with great precision. This was the first mural to be commissioned in the state. And by way of information, Bunn went on to design Schaefer pens, so you could see the amount of detail that he was noted for. Longhorns in Ogallala, Nebraska was done by Frank Mayshow. It's 1938, oil on canvas. Frank Mayshow selected a scene of the American West for the Ogallala Post Office, a subject that always fascinated him since his youth in Colorado. This and a mastery of compositional techniques of line, color, and space are represented in his work. The mural, a study of longhorns being herded across the plains, is dominated by the striking foreground of the animals, creating a visual field that dominates the work. The long string of animals winds and fades into the distance, giving pictorial depth. O'Neill, baling hay in Holt County in the early days, was done by Eugene Trentham. It's oil on canvas, done in 1938. It's another example of the American scene and portrays a contemporary scene of harvesting hay, a fitting subject since the area was known for its hay production. Here the haying process is represented from left to right, or from right to left, I should say, with a hay rack in the distance, approaching a large group of men at the baling machine. Horses provide the power for the machine, and as the mural progresses to the left, the hay is being pitched into the machine. Hay bales exit and are placed in stacks. Eugene Trentham had probably the worst time in doing a mural. He had a wife and a small infant baby, and payments for his mural came very slowly from Washington. And he wrote time and time again that he needed milk for the baby, he was out of coal for the house, and was out of food, and he had to go to friends and neighbors asking for $5 and $10 to support his family. Pawnee City was done by Kenneth Eaton. It's tempera and oil glaze on canvas. It's entitled The Auction. It was done in 1942. In this mural, Kenneth Eaton portrays the social aspects of a local livestock auction. Groups of people gather to exchange news and probably gossip. He enthusiastically described his proposed mural. Quote, "I decided on a community auction. It's a very colorful as well as characteristic affair in the Middle West," quote, unquote. In his mural, Eaton captured the American scene by using a contemporary subject. The Pawnee City mural was the last Nebraska work to be completed under the section. Eaton was authorized to proceed with its installation the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into war. Red Cloud. We have 3 murals there by Archie Music. Loading Cattle, the one you see now, Stockade Builders, and Moving Westward. They were done in 1941, oil on canvas. Music was a runner-up in a competition for a Wyoming mural. He took the Wyoming subject to the local community, and he reported that this design would be appropriate to the local folks. I'm glad to say that the cattle loading one definitely is. Hundreds of tons of beef traverse that valley, even Texas Longhorns. This may have been a misrepresentation of the history of Red Cloud or Music's desire to use the subject at hand. It was not the reality of Red Cloud being historically the location of Texas Longhorns, the shipment of Texas Longhorns. However, the subject was met with some reluctance by the postmaster. quote, he and the majority of townspeople sort of had their hearts set on some reference to Chief Red Cloud, for whom the town was named, unquote. But the outspoken music offered strong objection. He quoted from an Omaha World Herald article of the time that said that Red Cloud was a military dictator. He had murdered whites and was not an appropriate subject for a post office mural. But the section conceded to public desires and Solomon-like found an unobligated balance in the building's construction fund to add $500 to the artist's contract of $800. This would fund 2 additional murals on the screen wall above the postmaster's counters. They intended to include a depiction of Chief Red Cloud, and because of the compromise, it's the only Nebraska post office to receive 3 murals. In Schuyler, we find Wild Horses by Moonlight by Philip von Salza, oil on canvas, 1940. This mural depicts 2 rearing wild horses in the foreground, frightened by a coiled rattlesnake. In his mural, the horses are firmly grounded above the postmaster's door. The scene is set under a moonlit sky, adding to the intense mood of the scene. The colors are dark, reflecting the nighttime. The section was pleased in their correspondence, quote, the color and the emotional qualities of the painting are remarkable. His design was an entry for the Safford, Arizona post office in a competition. They moved his design to Schuyler, Nebraska, and he had to make a switch from desert mesas and cactus into poplar trees, which you can see framing each side of the mural, which is probably a reference to local cottonwoods. In Valentine, Katie Faulkner, UNL, University of Nebraska art instructor, completed End of the Line. It's oil and egg tempera on canvas and was done in 1939. Katie Faulkner's typical approach during her early years was a realistic style. As found in her work, she applied a regionalism and a distinct sense of color and texture. Her mural for the Valentine Post Office is an example of her approach. Faulkner also found a way to carry her mural to the tops of the bulletin boards. She incorporated the 2 vignettes seen below the local cattle brands, one depicting the open range of the sandhills and the other a sandhill scene with barbed wire fences and windmills. Together, each is broken above by a dark band incorporating the cattle brands of local ranches. And thanks to Cynthia Monroe, the former director of the Brand Commission, she researched each and every one of these brands, and they are all local brands of local ranchers. Faulkner, however, received the most criticism for her interpretation of the local landscape, her work on depicting historical facts, and the figures that were portrayed in the mural. The local newspapers sparred unrelentlessly about her work. They called the covered wagon, they said that it looked like a bun, and the train looked like a toy train. Untypical of the period, by the way. The local paper commented that the mural would never achieve a long-lasting recognition. Regarding the cost of the mural, the editor said, "We are glad the investment is not ours." Faulkner, an instructor at the University of Nebraska, was the only Nebraska artist to get a mural commission in her home state. Those are the murals. A little bit of background about the artists themselves. A number of them came out of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. This is where Frank Mayshow taught. He was one of the most prominent of the Nebraska muralists, one of the most prominent of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center to come out of the program. Even Time magazine called him, said that the Public Works of Art project was probably worthwhile just for the works that Mayshow produced. He did murals in the United States Postal Service building in Washington, D.C., and he was the instructor and the inspiration for many of the muralists that you've seen today. The Colorado Springs Art Center was founded in 1936 as the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center, and was directed by Boardman Robinson, who, if you're familiar with artists, was a very prominent artist of the period. The Fine Arts Center also attracted a number of prominent artists who were visiting instructors. So it was really a hotbed of activity there. As I mentioned, Ethel and Jenny Magaffin came out of the program. They were twin sisters, and they were inspired by Mayshow when he attended a high school class of theirs. And thanks to the high school art instructor, she came up with funds to send the sisters to Frank Mayshow's School of Fine Arts, which he had prior to joining the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. Jenny died at a very young age, and Mayshow died at a very young age. And it was, when Mayshow died, it was said that the full body of his works will never fully be realized. The Jenny Magaffin also died at a very early age, and she married Edward Chavez, as I mentioned. The Magaffin sisters and Chavez located to Woodstock, New York, where they remained active in the art scene in that community. There are several murals that were criticized, or could be criticized today for their historical content. The one that was right here that was criticized by the local folks. Whoops. There, I did it again. And where is my colleague Jill when I need her help? Okay, now, this one could be criticized by the wagon train, somewhat of a stereotypical view of a wagon train. The artist was very, very pleased that someone had sent him a photograph, a snapshot of Crow Butte, which he put in the left background. He was very pleased about that and said it was just the right touch he needed for his mural. Newell was very well known as a painter of farm animals, and you can see the detail in the fine horses and the oxen that he incorporated into the mural. Some could criticize Chavez for his depiction of building a sod house, but I find it quite accurate. You can see the posts and the beams that were used to carry the weight of the sod. The plow would not be the typical plow that would be used to cut the sod, but we might even by conjecture say that maybe he learned the building of a sod house and took that from the construction of adobe buildings from his native New Mexico. Speculation, but quite possible. This is one of the most historically inaccurate of all of them. I have to criticize it, although I love them all. When this was done, it was supposedly taken from a real incident that happened near Hebron, Nebraska. However, the railroad came to Hebron in 1874, and buffalo were long gone from the plains, certainly in that region of the state. As I said, the military post, Fort Kearney, is probably the most accurate. As I mentioned, it's a composite of buildings that were built throughout the period of the fort's existence. Some of the conveyances there are include an open-top buggy, which I doubt was used to cross the plains, Mormon handcarts, Conestoga wagons, and people on foot. One of our guests here today is Paul Hedren, and he may be able to tell us a little more about the buildings at the fort. And Tom Beaker, our resident military historian, could probably tell a little bit more about the accuracy of it. It was done at the time when the local citizens had acquired the site as a future state historical park, which it is today. The citizens had expectations to reconstruct the fort, so he wanted to be as detailed as possible. He studied depictions of the fort in maps that were borrowed from the State Historical Society, the National Park Service. He corresponded with Merrill Mattis on the accuracy of the buildings. He got drawings from the War Department. He put a lot of effort into it, and I would be very pleased to know how close he came to some of the buildings there. This one is an interesting mural, the one in Pawnee City. As mentioned, the artist said that he wanted to depict a colorful local affair, the local auction. The newspaper misrepresented his thoughts and said it looked like a foreclosure sale going on. Of course, the thoughts of that were not far from the minds of people during the Depression. And as I mentioned, the Red Cloud mural, Longhorns were not a typical shipping point. I think by the time the railroad came to Red Cloud, the Longhorn cattle drives had long disappeared. And the depictions, the smaller murals, the depictions above the postal clerk's desk office show Red Cloud to the left, pointing in the distance as dispossessed Native Americans are moved from their locale. You can see buffalo in the very background. The buffalo were disappearing, of course. And he's pointing to the coming of settlement in the next mural to your right, depicting the building of a stockade. And there was never a stockade built near Red Cloud, but he used a kind of a stereotypical approach to what folks thought a stockade should look like, kind of the Wild West movies, the depiction of those movies. He was a student of John Stuart Curry, and if you're familiar with the work of Curry, he used the flowing lines and the muscles of people, the extenuating figures, and you can see in the corner of the mural certainly an influence, I think, from Curry's work. I mentioned, too, the change of the desert mesas in the background and the depiction of the cactus disappearing in this mural. There was a competition in 1939, toward the end of the program, where Life magazine published one mural that was selected for each state in the Union. It was called the 48 States competition. This was one of 15 entries for Safford, Arizona. It was, for some reason, a very popular locale for the competition, and he was chosen as a runner-up to go to Schuyler, Nebraska instead. He competed against Gladys Lux, who was a Nebraska artist who depicted a pioneer scene near Schuyler, Nebraska. Her work is in the collection of the Nebraska State Historical Society, her scale model sketch. And of course, the inaccuracies and cartoon-like figures of Katie Faulkner's mural. It would be overlooking some of the acknowledgments. I was very pleased that the National Archives held a treasure trove of material on the post office murals. Each and every submittal of both the sketches, the color renderings for the mural, and even half-scale mural studies were meticulously photographed by the section in Washington, and those photographs are still available from the National Archives. So you will see, in glancing through the book, that we have a number of mural studies published which show the progression of the artist in relation to how he moved in his ideals for the mural, and also how the comments from the section were reflected in his changes in the final form of the mural. Also in that collection is the meticulous correspondence of the administrators of the mural program in Washington, D.C. As I said, they commented on the most meticulous, minutest details of the murals, even down to the size of the cattle's hooves, the way that a horse was depicted, the way its neck was too long or too short. These were just phenomenal resources to go through. The Smithsonian American Art Museum holds several of the color sketches that were done. The National Museum of American Art was very helpful in locating a number of the studies, and the Nebraska State Historical Society. I'd like to recognize Mike Smith, who encouraged me to go through with this, Jim McKee, who's on our publications committee and also a trustee for the Nebraska State Historical Society, and of course Jim and Rhonda. But everyone who's here today, both my friends who listen to me incessantly about the subject, and to my colleagues who probably caught me at bad times when I was in a bad mood, that my writing wasn't progressing very well. I also had the opportunity to correspond with two of the children of the muralists. Jenny Curry is the niece of Jenny Magaffin and the daughter of Ethel Magaffin. She would have been the niece-in-law of Edward Chavez, and she was just a pleasure to work with. She very much is the keeper of the family's art legacy and shared with me a number of things. Michael Mayshow of Palisade, Colorado, was very helpful in information and very generous with photographs relating to his father. He also had in his collection a number of photographs of the Colorado Springs School, the artists, and the school itself. So with that, I will mess it up again. Thank you very much. Please visit our website. Take a look at the book. We're very proud of it. I'm very proud of it. And we'll take any questions you may have. Matt?
Bob, did any of the artists actually come and visit the locations they were going to be painting for? Or did most of them work remotely from their studios?
The question was, did many of the artists come to the localities to study the area before they did their work? Most of them were fairly close to Nebraska, Colorado Springs. And one of the artists was from Iowa. They could afford to travel to the location. But all but one, the Crawford muralist, traveled to the locale. That was one of the semi-firm requirements of the section, that they visit with the local townsfolk about subject matter and come up with something that could be related by the local townsfolk. Glenn Newell did correspond with the local postmaster, and he came to Crawford, as many of them did, to actually install the murals. Most of them were installed by the artists themselves, and if they didn't have the budget, they would hire a local wallpaper hanger. Our curators of art today and our conservators might have a fit over the thought of a wallpaper hanger mounting a mural using white lead and varnish for adhesive. The contracts for the murals had several requirements. A number of sketches had to be sent in sequence so that they would get critiqued at all the various stages of the work. And as I mentioned, it was highly recommended that the artists visit the locality. They were on the contracts ranged from $500 to $700. which at that time sounds like a lot of money, but when you figure in travel, they had to provide all of the materials, the paint, the canvas, travel costs, installation of the mural. They didn't get quite as much as the going rate for murals at that time, but many were very pleased just to have the work. Thank you. Any other questions? Michael?
Murals done in every state?
Yes, there were about 1,100 murals done under the program during the 1930s, and the program wound down after America's entry into World War II. Yes, way in the back. Cindy?
What's the story behind where the murals were positioned? I mean, you're seeing some are above the door of the postmaster's office, but not all of them were, or?
Good question. The comment came to me that what dictated where the murals would be located in the post offices. I couldn't cover every subject sidelines, but you'll have to look at it in the book. But the post offices were kind of boilerplate floor plans. The exteriors were revised a little bit from post office to post office, but the interiors were pretty standardized, and they weren't made for public art. The section housed in the Treasury Department and their architects could not come to conclusion about how to build a small post office with space for the mural. The mural was typically placed, and in all examples in Nebraska, placed above the postmaster's door, high above the wall. Caused problems because they had hanging light fixtures, which obscured the view of the mural. Another problem was they had an entrance vestibule that jutted into the lobby space, and that caused difficulty getting the right view. So some artists took that as a challenge and came close in the visual field to the front where you could get a better angle at it. Very talented to know the limitations they were placed under. All artists got a copy of the floor plans for the mural location and for the elevation that it was proposed for. They're typically 16 feet, 12 to 16 feet, depending on the width of the lobby space, and about 4 feet tall. They're long and narrow. Thank you. I had a question back there. Yes.
How competitive was this? What kind of evidence exists about the competitive nature of the thing across the country?
It was very competitive. They had two classifications of competitions. One was for the most prominent of federal buildings that were being built at the time, primarily those built in Washington. Those were by invitation, although they were not limited to artists, but they were solicited because of their known work. They also had regional competitions, which were limited to artists that were in the general region of the commission. But the majority or most of the small post offices were selected by the competency of the artist. If you entered a good depiction to one of the competitions, you might gain the eye of the judges and may be invited then to do a smaller post office. Although my research has indicated that several of the artists, Frank Macho, for example, was known not at the time of this mural, but beforehand, as just having a great sense of doing murals, not for his participation in the competitions. And I think the Magaffin sisters, Jenny for certain, had never done a mural before, but she was recognized for other work. Good question. Yes?
Is there any particular reason there isn't a mural in Lincoln?
That's a good question. Why wasn't there a mural in Lincoln? There was a predecessor program to the mural program, which was a make-work program for relief of the unemployed artists. And there were a number of works produced out of that program. It's separate from the Treasury Department program. There were several mural studies done for Nebraska buildings. Two of the mural studies were done for the new federal building in Omaha. They were never realized. That particular program had failed by that time and was replaced with another program. There was also a mural that was supposedly done as a study for the Lancaster County Courthouse building, the old courthouse building. I think, with the exception of the federal building in Omaha, I don't think there were large enough that there were no buildings being built significantly at the time. One could argue that the addition to the old federal building here in Lincoln would date to that, but was not identified for the mural. The murals were selected for post offices that were constructed and had money left over in their construction budget. 1%, if there was money left over, 1% could be given for a work of art. So it's kind of a predecessor to the 1% for art that we see in Nebraska and for federal buildings. And that's why there were 3 post offices in Nebraska that did not receive murals. They exceeded their budget. And as I said, in Red Cloud, they must have had a good reserve because they put aside extra money so that they could do the 3 murals to satisfy the public. Thank you. Good question. Yes?
What kind of condition are the murals in now, and are they at risk, or are they all pretty good shape?
The question was the condition of the murals, what shape they're in today. They were the ones that were still in federal ownership, with the exception of the Valentine Post Office, they were conserved in about 1981. A professional conservator was brought out under contract with the federal government to conserve them, to clean them. We were talking earlier if some of the color has faded because there is light that enters the building. Can't say because I wasn't there to see the original artwork. They are protected under federal art law, a federal law. Both a program administered by our office, what's called Section 106. If a federal building is being discontinued, taken out of federal ownership, or if alterations are made to the building, the federal agency must consult with our office, and of course we would jump on any concerns over a piece of art. In the case of the Valentine Post Office, fortunately, the Postal Service saw fit to keep it in the building. Some post office murals were taken out of the building when the building was no longer used as a postal facility, carefully removed from the wall, rolled up, and sent to Washington, where they have never seen the light of day. In fact, some have also been found in some pretty strange locations. The Maisho family helped identify the location for several of the murals that had been removed from some of the buildings that in which they were originally located.
Were those Nebraska buildings?
No. All of ours are intact, fortunately. And because they're in public buildings, I really encourage people as they travel across the state to stop in at a post office at virtually any time of day, and you can enjoy the mural. There is also federal art law. There is a federal law that protects these murals, so that if they have to be cleaned and maintained according to federal standards. So they're fairly well protected. Mike.
Well, Bob, I just want to say, in his introduction, Tom indicated your work at the Historical Society, but this is a project you undertook on your own.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, this was a project of my own, a passion that I don't know the genesis of how I got interested in this, except a colleague of mine did what's called a multiple property documentation form to list all of the 12 post offices in the National Register of Historic Places. I happened to go to Washington about the time that she was working on that project and started delving into the records to get copies for that project, and somehow it stuck.
You might comment on the other book that we thought was so good, which is the Texas book. I hate to say that here.
Yes. I had the opportunity to go to Texas, and here on the bookshelf of one of the museum stores was a book on the Texas Post Office murals. I think they had either 35 or 45 murals in the state, many more than we did. And it was so well produced that I know that our editor, David Bristow, and I looked at it very carefully in the design for this book. Any other questions?
Who did the design on this?
Nathan, David, are you here? Help me. Yes, he did this. He's a designer for the University of Nebraska Press, and he did this off of his regular duties, so very good. Yes, Roxanne?
Is there any documentation of the artists describing their work? That
Yes.
one that has the 3 panels. There's a lot going on in there.
Mhm.
And it looks like it has references perhaps to some of the, I don't know, the Northern European and Bruegel and those guys and all.
Oh, absolutely. The question was correspondence or information regarding inspiration of the artists, their study of art history. Maisho was a super fan of Bruegel, and his works reflect that. Both of the Magaffin sisters and Edward Chavez received fellowships to go to Europe to study, and so their later works certainly reflect that. Kenneth Eaton. Roxanne, do you want to elaborate on Kenneth Eaton's work also for Nebraska?
In the Capitol, the first murals that were added to the Capitol.
Kenneth Eaton did the 1950s era, did the murals for the Nebraska State Capitol, the 4 panels of the arts and the trades, three.
Labors of, yes, the 3 labors of the head, hands, and heart.
Yes. Any other questions? I've really enjoyed this. Good questions. I couldn't cover every aspect of the subject. A little teaser for the book.
Where can we get that book?
We can get that book today. They just arrived by special overnight shipment from the publisher yesterday at 9:30. We were sweating it a little bit to get them. They're available at our landmark stores, both here, and they will eventually, I think, be certainly placed in the Capitol store, the Nebraska State Historical Society stores, discount for members. I will stay around afterwards to autograph any if you want me to scratch something for you and ruin the value. Jim, I got that from you. Jim McKee signed so many of his own books, he said that the ones that are unsigned are rarer. And some say that the autograph defaces the book, but I'll be happy to do that. Thank you, everyone.